Welcome to this month's Agility Learning Lab. This month we're going to be going over new processes in Agility. This will probably be a little bit of a quicker session. I'm thinking this will be, one of our faster ones, but we'll still take some time. We're going to be really doing a deep dive into 3 different processes that we've recently added for the SAP Business One product. All 3 of those processes are unique and completely new to WiSys, things that we didn't originally support. So it's a lot of really relevant information and helpful information for understanding what's there out of the box. But we will talk a little bit about potential tailoring and ways to optimize these new processes that we've added as well. So should be a lot of relevant information. Feel free to ask any questions because, again, I'm sure these are all things that you guys have not seen in our product yet, unless you are pretty on top of updating quickly and have gone in there and tested it. So put any questions you have in the chat. All right, before we get into it, I always like to do my introduction, so I leave my camera on for that. Hi, everybody. I'm Chase Linsenbigler. I'm going to go ahead and turn this off so you can focus on the content and not necessarily have my face taking up the screen. So what I do here at WiSys is I manage all of our partner enablement. And then as of recently, I also provide customer-facing consulting. I was a customer-facing consultant in the past, and now I've come back to help on some projects, and help keep things moving fast with our SAP Business One implementations. A big part of our initiatives for partner enablement and really just making sure any WiSys stakeholders or users are as knowledgeable as possible are, of course, these learning labs. So for those of you that haven't been here before, these will always be on the second Tuesday of every month, 2:30 to 3:30 EST. Of course, I always like to mention that because if you want to make sure this time's available on your calendar, feel free to block it off. We try to strictly adhere to that schedule, and we've done a good job with that so far, and that's the plan moving forward. So if you want to make sure you have the time available, that's when we will be doing these learning labs. For my partners on the call, if we don't work together currently, I always like to make sure to run through our available partner resources as well. Of course, whenever you sign on as a WiSys partner, we provide introducing training to run you through all the basic out-of-the-box functionality of WiSys and everything you really need to know about the standard product. In addition to that, we do in-depth training for our design tools so you can tailor the WiSys solution. And we also offer standing team meetings for continued WiSys enablement. Again, for my partners, these standing team meetings are really valuable. So I urge you guys, if you don't have something with me, reach out. Let's get something set up. It just gives you a slot on my calendar so you can make sure you have my time to, jump in there and run through any open WiSys questions or issues you may have. Talk about customer or prospect processes, workflow, things like that for customers or prospects. That's all fine. Even talking through tailorings, right? I think it's a really good way for you to take advantage of your WiSys resources and make sure you're getting as much information as frequently as possible. So again, any partners on the call that we don't have a current meeting, set something up. Let's make sure we're staying in touch and giving you as many resources as we can. All right. Now let's get into it. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to cover 3 new processes. These have all been added to the WiSys system in the last year. We're going to be going through goods returns. Of course, that's a return from a purchase order, so on the inbound side. Then we'll go to the complete opposite end of the spectrum, and we'll go through sales returns. So, of course, a return from a sales order, the outbound side of returns. And then we will finish up on production disassembly. The disassembly piece is a little bit quicker, and it's pretty similar to things you've seen in the standard process, but it's good to, introduce it to you and, really dissect it so that you can make sure you feel comfortable with the functionality and understand all the ins and outs of it. So let's go ahead and start by going through goods returns here. So first, I'm seizing the opportunity of going through goods returns to show you another piece of new functionality as well, and that is the ability to do split purchase orders via GRPO. So really we'll just use our standard GRPO form that's now enabled for split purchase orders. We're going to receive in a split PO. Then we're going to put that the items from that split PO away, but we're going to discover some of the items are damaged. So we're going to put them away into a damaged bin. And in this business case here, right, we're going to assume the warehouse manager is coming over and reviewing the items in that damaged bin. And if they do confirm, yep, that's, some damaged items coming from the vendor, they'll sign off on it. We'll create our goods return request in SAP, and then we will create the actual goods return on the handheld using our new goods return form there. So we'll run through this whole process, and this will give you really good detail on standard out of the box way to handle goods returns, but we'll also dive into some potential tailorings and ways to optimize this. So I'm going to start by opening up SAP here, and I'm going to go to my purchase order. So here we're starting with this purchase order 893. As you can see, it's canceled because it is a split PO. So we started with 3 lines. 2 of them are for warehouse 1, one's for warehouse 5. And right now we just care about warehouse 5 because we're going to work inside of our bin warehouse. So that's where we're going to operate out of for today's purposes. So if I move over here, we're not going to use 893-1. We're going to use 893-2. That's for our warehouse 5, our bin warehouse. So we can go ahead and get started here. We have our purchase order that we want to receive in. So we're just going to go with our standard GRPO form. A real easy introduction to the process here. So when I open up our standard GRPO, you'll notice nothing looks different. Nothing has actually changed about the user interface of the form. We've just enabled the ability to use those split purchase orders. And that can really be done in 3 ways. First off, of course, we could just search for the original purchase order of 893. And when we hit enter there to search it, we'll see that we actually have those 2 segmented split PO options, and we would want to select 893-2 in this case. We also have the ability to use our lookup, and if we typed in 893 here, we would see that both options, 893-1 and -2, are available in our lookup. And then finally, and probably the most common way in most of these cases, is we can just type in 893-2 and proceed by doing our goods receipt for that purchase order. So again, I just wanted to cover a little bit about the split POs there at the beginning here. It's just a really easy way for me to introduce that piece of the new functionality as well. So those are there for any of you that are using split POs. And now I'll go ahead and proceed through the process. So we're going to do item 8543. And as you can see here, we have a defaulted receiving bin. Again, this process, it depends on the customer. The process is going to be different for a lot of people. In most cases, we definitely lean toward and try and push our customers toward using a receiving bin. That's the most standard warehouse process, right? We want to be able to pull these items off of the truck as quickly as possible, receive them into inventory, and then we can worry later about putting them away or doing any quality assurance or anything like that. But the first goal is to get them off the truck, get the truck out of here, and get these items into our inventory so we can actually, see what we truly have available. So I'm going to go ahead and proceed here with the 20. One other thing I did want to mention, a possible tailoring, right? If it is a situation like what we're going through today, where we're receiving items in on the dock, some may be damaged, we could always do something where, you could add a drop down here and select between your receiving bin or a damaged bin or something along those lines. But for today's process, we're going to go ahead and move them to the damaged bin during the put away step. So, during that put away stage, we're going to actually take a look at the items and see if they are, good quality items or if there's damage and we need to send them back to the vendor. So now I'm just going to enter 20 here and save. And now I have saved it to my preload table. Again, we're using the preload functionality here so that if there were multiple lines, we could post them all as one GRPO. So whenever I refresh here, you'll see nothing has changed to my purchase order in SAP. And if I view This will actually show us what's in our preload so we can check and see, okay, that line that we just did, all 20 are sitting in there in that preload state, ready to be moved to a GRPO in the system. So I can just go ahead and post and create our GRPO here. Now it's prompting for label print. We'll just print to screen. Here's our labels, our receiving labels we can slap on our cases of our product here. And now it is received into our receiving bin, 05D. And if we jump back here in SAP and refresh, we see our purchase order is now closed for 893-2. And if we check our relationship map, so we can see our original purchase order, here's the split. We're using number 2, and we have a goods receipt PO there for purchase order 893-2, and that new goods receipt PO is 938. And here it is if we want to drill into that. Now we'll move on to the put away step, right? So we received in these items, they're sitting here in our receiving bin 05D. Now we can use our filtered put away form that only looks at items in that receiving bin to go ahead and move these items into standard inventory. So after the items have been received, we decide, all right, we're going to move these to the shelf. At this point in time, right, in my business case, again, every customer is different, but in this business case, we're assuming that the person who's moving these items into inventory is just giving them a good check over real quick, making sure the items are not damaged or incorrect or anything of that nature. And in this case, we're going to say that we notice 3 of the items are damaged, right? So I'm just going to scan my damaged bin here. And I'm going to move 3 of those to that damaged bin. And if I jump back to SAP here again, just to stay on top of the trace, if we check our inventory transfer, we'll see there's 3 there, moved from our receiving bin 05D to our damaged bin. And then the rest of the items, they look okay. So I'm going to move that 17 just into standard inventory here. I'm just going to look for an open bin. We'll go with 05A1 and move the full 17 quantity there. Now all of the items are put away. So we're ready to continue with the process here. But again, the person who's putting them away gave a good check over. They noticed that some were damaged. Now this step in the process, maybe we have a warehouse manager or a quality assurance rep, somebody of that type of status, right? Come over, take a look at the items in the damaged bin. If they do in fact confirm, okay, those 3 items are damaged and we need to send them back to the vendor and do a return, then we will have somebody, probably the warehouse manager or the person who did the checking, jump in here with our goods receipt PO and go ahead and copy it to a goods return request. Again, we want to make sure we're doing the request in this case because we'll create the actual goods return in the real-time process whenever the driver shows up to take those items and bring them back to the vendor. So we'll go ahead and create our request here. And we only want it to be for a quantity of 3 in this case, not the full 20. I'm going to add and view. Okay, now we have our goods return request number 20. Now those items will sit in that damaged bin until the driver comes to pick them up and bring them back to our vendor. And once he does arrive, we'll go ahead to our goods return application here. And we'll go ahead and move through this process. We'll search for our return request document, number 20 right here. Go to our item, 8543. And then again, this item's not serial or batch tracked, but if it were at this point, we would, select our serial or batch numbers. But this is just a simple item, so we're going to find our bin. Now, again, another way to optimize this through tailoring, if you do use a damaged bin for these types of items, or maybe you have a return to vendor bin, whatever you want to call it, right? If you have a bin that's going to be the standard to use for these items, you could have that hard coded in here through tailoring, but in this case, I'm just going to scan my damaged bin and grab my 3 of this item 8543 here and save. And that is now saved again to our preload. So just to reiterate, Nothing has happened on the document yet. We need to make sure to post that into SAP. The reason we use that preload is if I had multiple lines here on my goods return request, I could make all of those lines, I could process them all to the same goods return in SAP instead of one goods return at a time and having 3 corresponding returns to this request, right? So in this case, we only have 1 line. We don't need to continue the process. Everything is ready to go. It's all sitting in our preload. So I'm just going to go ahead and post here. And upon posting, the form will clear itself. And if we jump back into SAP here, we'll see when we refresh, our request is closed. Now we'll have a really good trace in our relationship map. This is one of the really nice things that SAP does. It's just such an easy way to walk back through this, right? So we see here we're in our return request 20. We did create that corresponding goods return 26, but we can map that all the way back through the process to our goods receipt PO, the original PO, and even the original purchase order that was split all the way back through, right? Now in this case, we can drill into our goods return and we'll see it's closed, the document is processed and finished, and we returned those 3, that quantity of 3 of 8543 to the vendor in this case. So that's our goods return process out of the box. That's the standard way to handle it. As I mentioned, there's some different ways to optimize, especially when it comes to bins. You really have to reflect on what the process is there, what type of bin structure you have, and how you're really treating these items in the warehouse. So there's some different steps that could be involved through tailoring, but the standard process is pretty simple. There's some other ways to change this. You could not default a receiving bin, and then you skip the put away step altogether. There's some options there, but this is a good general standard process flow for how we're going to do goods returns on WiSys. So I'm going to go ahead and clear out of these documents here. Jump back to my PowerPoint. So again, we ran through all these steps, right? We took that split PO and we just received it in now with our standard GRPO form. It's enabled for split POs. Those items went directly into our receiving bin, which was my doc bin. During the put away stage, I put the good items into standard inventory. Anything that looked damaged got moved to a damaged bin. Now, theoretically here, I had that step of a warehouse manager or somebody like that coming over, doing a little QA, making sure those items were damaged. Once they were confirmed to be damaged, we created the goods return request in SAP. And then we went ahead and processed that goods return request, taking those items out of that damaged bin through our goods return form on the handheld. Now let's jump to the other end of the spectrum and talk about sales returns. So here with sales returns, we're going to walk the process the whole way through. But that said, I did want to simplify it. So instead of picking or going through fulfillment manager and packing packages and shipping it out that way, we're just going to go ahead and do an SO delivery from the handheld. That'll be the quickest way possible to go about this. Then after that SO delivery, whatever the process would be, either the customer calling in and saying they're making a return, maybe they go through a portal or send an email, whatever that process is, we get word that they want to return some of the products. So we'll create the return request in SAP. Then we will go ahead and process the sales return on the handheld. Once again, these items are coming into the receiving area, right? The customer sent them back, we're receiving them back in. So we're going to default during that sales return process to just bring them into our receiving bin and then go over them later. During the put away stage, we'll take any salvageable items and move them to a QA bin to check and make sure they truly are salvageable and could still be used for a customer. And anything that's clearly unsalvageable will be issued out of the system. There's a bunch of different ways that we could do that. In this case, I'm just going to operate off the assumption that this theoretical company I'm using here, they don't care about those items anymore. They want to just get them issued out of inventory, cut their losses, say those items are damaged, and be done with it. So I'm going to jump back to Business One here. We're going to go ahead through the process. So first, we're going to open up our sales order. All right, we're going to use this 1143 just for this one item here. And on the handheld, We're going to go ahead to SO delivery. If anybody's not familiar with SO delivery, this is a very simple delivery form. You're basically just taking items from a sales order, saving them to a preload table, and then posting from that preload table one sales order delivery into SAP. So here we can enter our sales order 1143. All right, and then we can go ahead and scan our items. So this time it's going to be this A00001. And then we can go ahead and grab our bin. So in this case, I'm just going to find a bin in the warehouse that has a sufficient quantity of this item. We'll go here, full quantity of 15, and save. And now these items, once again, same process that we've been talking about, right? They're saved to a preload. So if I have multiple lines, I can go through those other lines and post one bulk delivery note here. But in this case, I only have one line. Again, nothing has happened in SAP yet. Now I can view my preload table and see that those items are sitting there ready to be shipped out of the system and have a delivery note created. So I can just go ahead and post here and get the process started by actually sending those items out to the customer. So now we have a closed sales order in SAP. On our relationship map, we have our delivery, and the customer, theoretically in this case, has the items, right? So now next step in the process, we're just going to say the customer called in this case, right? Whether they call in, they use a portal, maybe it's via email, whatever the situation is, we get indication that there is going to be a return for this sales order. So we're going to go here to our delivery note, and we're just going to copy it to a return request. Again, we want to do the request because the actual return itself will be created on the handheld in real time whenever we receive the items that were returned. So we'll go to our return request here. And in this case, they're not returning the full 15. Maybe they felt that just 5 of them looked a little bit damaged. So those are the items they're going to send back. We want to make sure we have the right warehouse, warehouse 5. We'll add in view. And now we have this return request number 9 here added to our system. So now I'm going to go ahead and pull up the handheld. We're just patiently waiting, right, for the items to arrive at the warehouse. Now, whenever the items do in fact arrive and we're ready to go ahead and process the return request, creating a sales return in the system, we're going to go ahead and scroll down to our sales return application here. Once again, I have this defaulting based on my receiving bin because the real process is a truck is pulling up with our return, right? We're going to receive that in. We want to get that off the truck as quickly as possible, get it into inventory as quickly as possible, and then we'll take the corresponding steps after that fact. So now we're just going to go ahead, get these received in. So we'll go to our document number 9, go ahead and scan our item A001 and a quantity of 5. And again, we're saving here to a preload. Nothing has happened. That way, if we have multiple lines, we can post them all to one sales return. Again, that's a common theme, right? We keep talking about that, but the preload is a very valuable piece of the functionality here because if we had 40 lines on this return request, right, we don't want 40 corresponding sales returns in the system. We want one. That's why we're utilizing the preload. Again, though, in this case, I only have one line, so we are ready to go ahead and post. So now I'll go ahead and select my post functionality there. And the sales return is created in the system. I could print here. We'll just skip that for the sake of time. And if we jump back in SAP, we'll notice when we refresh, our request is now closed. The line's grayed out. And on our relationship map here, we see again that nice trace the whole way back to the sales order that we talked about with the on the opposite end with the purchase order side of things. We have that trace the whole way through. You can see a sales order to the delivery, the return request created for that delivery, and then finally our ending return number 24 here. And if we drill into that, we'll see it's also closed. It's been processed, right? We have the items. We're done with it. they are now in inventory. But in this case, during the sales return process there, we just received them into the dock. So now we're going to want to go through the same process as receiving goods and go ahead and put those away. So if I go to my put away form here and I scan in that item, now we can take whatever the next steps are to either get those into standard inventory if they're going to go back out to another customer, or get them issued out of the system. Now, in this case, I'm going to say that I have a few items that, they look fine, they pass the eye test. I'm not worried about them. I do want to do additional quality assurance, but at this point, I think they're going to be fine to go back out to another customer, right? This just wasn't the right customer for them. So I'm going to scan in my QA bin. I'm going to move 3 of these to that QA section. Those can be checked via the QA team later and decide if they are in fact suitable to go out to another customer. So those are potentially salvageable. We'll move them into inventory for now, figure it out later. The rest of the items don't pass the eye test. They are clearly not going to go out to another customer. They've been damaged and rendered inusable or not sellable throughout the entire process here. So those items we are going to move to our damage bin. I'll just go ahead and do that quantity of 2. And again here, there's a lot of ways to speed up and optimize these processes through tailoring as well, just depending on what your process is, right? If I know that in general, these items are going to be moved to a damage bin and I'm pretty much never doing QA, or if I'm always doing QA, I can default those bins in the sales return application. So I cut out this put away step immediately, right? And move them to the right spot in an automated process. That could be done. Again, using bins and knowing your process is a really easy way to speed up these forms and make sure you're getting everything to the correct location as quickly and efficiently as possible. And now, as I mentioned here, the last step in this process, this company, right, they don't really care about anything else. They want to make sure they get these items out of the system and cut their losses. So I'm just going to issue them out in this case. Again, the process is different for everybody. This might not be your customer's process, but in this case, I just wanted to show an end of life for some of these items that truly were damaged in the process. So we're going to go ahead and issue them out. We'll scan in that item A001, and of course we want to use the damage bin. Again, a custom application could be made here for damaged item issue, right? That defaults this damaged bin if that were your process. There's a lot of different ways to play with defaulting bins, and of course I want to get that point across throughout today's session because all of these new processes we're talking about are heavily reliant on certain bins because we're dealing with unique items that we want to separate from the rest of inventory. So I'm going to go ahead and pick my quantity of 2 here and go ahead and issue them out of my damaged bin. And now those items are no longer in the system. There's no risk of somebody accidentally grabbing them and selling them to a customer. There's no risk of us, over allocating and thinking we have more items than what is truly available. They're now out of the system and we're cutting our losses on it, calling it a day. And that sales return process is finished. We've reached the end of those items' lives. Now, of course, we have 3 more sitting in QA. We'll review those items and decide, okay, are those QA items definitely good to go? Should we move them into standard inventory, or do they need to get moved to the damage bin and get issued out? That'll remain to be seen, but that would be the end process for those. And that takes us through the entire cycle of that item's life. So I'm going to close a couple of these documents here. We'll jump back to our PowerPoint quickly. So again, with this sales return process, we started out with a real simple SO delivery to get them to the customer, right? We didn't do fulfillment manager or picking or packing or anything like that. We just got these items from our warehouse to the customer's hands. Then customer called in, right? They said they were returning items, so we created the return request in SAP. Then we went ahead and did our sales return there on the handheld to actually process that return request, creating a sales return document, closing the document, and bringing those items into inventory. And in that case, in our receiving bin. Once in our receiving bin, we use put away to move the potentially salvageable items to a QA bin so they can be reviewed and potentially moved back into standard inventory. And we moved anything that was clearly unsalvageable to a damaged bin and went ahead and issued them out of the system. All right, now for the quickest and most simple of the processes, let's go ahead and go through production disassembly here. So production disassembly is just basically our ability to take a disassembly style production order, take that finished good or parent item, right, issue it to disassembly to be disassembled, and then the ability to do a receipt from disassembly for each corresponding component that's a part of that finished good as we actually take that finished good apart. So I'm going to jump into SAP here and we'll bring up our production order. All right, here's our production order 626, and we're going to go ahead and move through this process here. So production order 626, our finished good is 8545. So we're going to start by, of course, switching our menu from distribution to production here. And then we're going to go to our issue to disassembly. And we're just going to go grab one of these 8545 items from inventory and move it over to our production area, issuing it for production so that we can go ahead and take it apart because we need more of the components that make up this item, right? So I can start by entering in my production order number 626. Now in this case, again, I'm going to go with a defaulted bin. I have a shortage bin, and whenever I have a shortage of components, I'm moving finished goods into that shortage bin so that I know I need to take those apart eventually. So that's where all of my items for disassembly are sitting. So I'm going to go ahead and scan my shortage bin, and we'll do a quantity of 1 here. And now that item has been issued. Now, the unique thing about this, whenever we refresh our production order, since that is our parent item, we don't see anything issued, right? Nothing reflects here on the order. We have to go to our relationship map, and we can see that corresponding issue for production of the parent item, 8545, just a quantity of 1 here. It's now issued for production in the system. And we're ready to go ahead and disassemble this whenever, at our leisure, whenever we're actually ready to go take it apart. So now in this case, we'll go ahead and begin the disassembly process. We'll go to our receipt from disassembly here, and we'll just enter in our order number again. And we're going to move through and do a receipt from disassembly for each individual component that made up that item. So we'll go ahead and start here with 8543. I must have scanned the wrong barcode there at first. So there's 8543. And we want to go ahead and move that to our production staging bin. So in this case, all of my components in my warehouse are in my production staging bin. That's the way I want it to be. I want to keep those components separate from finished goods and standard inventory. So we will scan our production staging bin. Again, if you want to optimize this form, if you have a similar situation that I'm describing and you want these things to go into the same bin every time, you could tailor this form to immediately move them into the production staging bin without a scan. That's another way to make it more efficient and optimize the flow there. And I will just do that full quantity remaining of 3. Now, upon saving there, if I refresh this time, we'll see 3 issued, even though it's really 3 received because we're doing a disassembly type of production order. But we'll see the 3 issued. And if we go to our relationship map, we'll see that receipt from production there for the 3 items of 8543. So now we can continue moving through the process, right? We have 2 more components to receive in. So I'm going to go ahead and scan 8546. Again, same process. I'm going to scan my production staging bin. I could have tailored this right so that it automatically filled in and saved me a scan. That might be the most efficient and most productive process for you. But in this case, I just left it standard to show you a standard process flow. We'll do all 5 of that item. Then we'll go ahead and move to our last one here, A001, same bin, production staging, quantity of 1. And now we have finished our receipt from production, or our receipt from disassembly. We have received all those components, and when we refresh, we see they're all issued and grayed out. On our relationship map here, all of those components have a corresponding receipt from production. Here's 8543, 8546, and A00001. So that's a pretty simple process flow for those of you that are familiar with our production process. It is very, very similar. You're really just reversing the roles, right? Instead of doing the receipt for the finished good, you're doing the issue for the finished good. And instead of issuing out the components, you're doing a receipt for the components, right? So we're just backtracking through that process here. Again, doing the issue to disassembly, taking your finished good from the warehouse and moving it to a production area to be taken apart. We'll do the receipt from disassembly to bring in all of the components from that finished good. And in this case, I moved all those components straight into a production staging bin. If you have a similar situation where all your components go into the same bin, you could default that bin inside the form to optimize that process and speed it up, and also prevent error, making sure that nobody can move those items into a bin they're not intended to go into. So what do we cover today? At a higher level, right? We ran through the goods returns process. We used our GRPO functionality, just a standard out of the box form to do split POs, which is another new addition to the product. We received in that split PO. Again, we defaulted our receiving bin. So after that stage, we needed to put it away. And during the put away process, we noticed that some items were damaged. So we put them away into our damaged bin. Warehouse manager came over, checked it out, agreed that they were damaged and needed to be returned to the vendor. So he created a goods return request in SAP, and we took that request and processed it to a finished closed goods return via the handheld when the driver actually showed up to take those goods. Sales return process, very similar, right? We ran through the whole thing going from SO delivery, taking those items to the actual customer. We received word that there was going to be a return. So we created the sales return request in SAP Business One. When the items did in fact arrive, we used the sales return form to bring them back into inventory, into our receiving bin once again, creating a sales return in SAP and closing the document because it was processed and finished. We then put those items away. Anything that was salvageable, we moved to a QA area. Anything clearly unsalvageable was again moved to that damaged bin. And in this case, we just wanted to cut our losses and get it out of inventory. So we issued all of those damaged items from the return out of the system. And then lastly, we did production disassembly, where we simply issued a finished good from standard inventory over to our production area, took it apart, did a receipt from disassembly for each individual component that made up that finished good, and moved all those components immediately into a production staging bin where we house all of our components in the warehouse. So again, today my main goal was to give you a real deep dive into these out-of-the-box processes for some new functionality that we've added to the product. So hopefully this gave you a good explanation and understanding of the standard processes with those. But I did also want to mention some, potential spots for enhancement and additional efficiency, right? If you know your process well enough that you can default things, or you want to default things to limit errors and the amount of scans that you have to do. All of these forms have the ability to be optimized in that way, because again, we're typically using specific bins for this type of functionality to separate these unique items from standard inventory. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned that stuff throughout, and hopefully this gave you a good idea of how we can optimize based on your bin structure as well. But yeah, in general, that's a rundown of our new standard processes. So I figure I'll hang out here for a minute, open it up to any questions. If anybody has any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. If not, hopefully I'll see you guys for our next session.